Welcome, everyone. I'm Brenda Minyakwi, VP of Operations here at Raven, and I'll be your host today. A little bit about me. I'm passionate about continuous improvement and driving ROI through empowering people, defining processes, and finding the right tools to make everyone's lives easier. Thanks for joining our webinar panel today, Eliminating Efficiencies Through Digital Transformation. I'm really excited about today's session, and I will introduce our speakers in a moment. But before we get started, I did have a couple of housekeeping items to just go over. This webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent to you via email later today. Marisha from our marketing team is online for any technical support. So if you have any questions or issues throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat box option to message her and she can help you out. And lastly, would love for you guys to join in the conversation today. If you have any questions, please submit them through the session in the Q&A box. You can access the Q&A box in the menu at the bottom of the screen. We've also set aside some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar to answer the questions. And I did want to thank a lot of their registrants as well who pre-submitted some questions for today. So what does Raven do? For those that are not familiar with Raven, we work with manufacturers in two key ways. We help them account for 100% of production time and losses, and we engage operators to make it easy to provide meaningful human context that enables confident, fact-driven productivity improvements through the shop floor. So without further ado, Catalina and Jane, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves to our audience today.
Thank you, Brenda. Just a little bit about myself. I have been always very passionate about automation, including software and industrial automation. So my career has been a mixed background between those two fields. That's what allowed me to be here today. And I have been spending really my last 14 years, a little bit over that, of my career, like being driven by my motto, which is to empower people through technology. And this is what it brings me here today.
And I'd like to introduce myself as well and say thank you to Brenda and the Raven team for inviting me. So I'm Jane Arnold, spent over 30 years in various roles in manufacturing, primarily in the chemical space. Though I did spend a couple of years at Stanley Black Decker, where I was able to apply my learnings in chemical to discrete and additive and really from the adaption of technology space. So I started out as a control engineer, and throughout my career had opportunities at various levels of responsibility, including plant manager and department head of a global team. And today I'm in a career pivot, doing a lot of interesting things with Industry 4.0 advisory, but I'm working as a venture partner with Momenta, which is a lot of fun because I get to meet some great startups and talk about technology. It's just really exciting for me. And I'm on the board of Aperio AI as well as VoxelJet. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Jane and Catalina. It's a pleasure. So for our audience today, I'll just do a quick recap on the agenda. So we do have 4 themes that we're going to focus on. The first one, how to get started with digital transformation, then scale for success. Then we'll move into the combination of data collection and automated processes for even more wins on the shop floor. Steps to building a strategy that engages your workforce, boosts their capabilities, and increases performance. And then the last theme is ways to leverage different teams to respond to change and adopt digital technologies. And then we'll close it off with a live Q&A. So to get us all started, I've had the pleasure to know more of both your backgrounds, Jane and Catalina. So I think, Catalina, I'm fortunate to work with you every day, and I get to see the passion that you're talking about. So just to bring the audience on the same page, how did you get started in manufacturing?
My academic background, I'm an electronic and telecommunication engineer, and I have a master's degree in automation. And that background on my education opened a window into the manufacturing world for me. And I think what it really hits is when I saw that and when I saw what is happening, I was really amazed by how the materials are transformed into products that we use in our everyday, right? And that was really fascinating. And this is how I got started in this mix of words that I've been.
No, great. And Jane, I've seen you tagged in the LinkedIn post as well, and following your interesting career pivots over the last couple of months has been something interesting. So I see in your colleagues have dropped an accolade, the guru of manufacturing. Tell us, how did that all start?
Oh, that's fun. Thank you, Brenda. So I have had an unusual career path that gave me opportunities to work with and really learn from a wide variety of people. I started out as a summer job at a chemical plant in Texas City, and doing an instrument electrical drafting. So it was really just a way to make some money so I could pay for the next semester, but it was really impactful on me. And I was fascinated about how everything worked and how operations just knew what to do and when. And I decided that I needed to change my career, my education requirements and my career path. And I ended up, my summer job turned into 16 years at that plant. And then there was another pivotal moment for me that changed my perspective when I worked with operations. So as an engineer doing control system design and implementation, actually understanding the operator was very impactful. So there was a few months where I worked as an operator on the board, and I realized the gap between engineering design and operator needs, and it was huge. And so I spent 4 months on the board correcting stuff that I didn't realize was a problem, because I didn't actually run the board. So having that human-centric design is really key, and the only way you can do that properly is with a bottoms-up approach. So from then on, and that was in the late 90s, from then on, I always made it my mission to have a bottoms-up approach with operator input. And I think that's led to my success over time. And as I moved up in leadership, implored my teams to do the same thing. So force them to go and sit with the operator, talk with the operator, and do that. And it really made sustainable improvements.
Now, I can certainly relate to that as well. Through my career, I started off in auto, and it's the same thing. I think the philosophy in the auto industry is the first 6 weeks you start off on the line just so you get to understand what the day-to-day life is before you build in systems. And I think I really gravitate to that, especially when you have to deploy the digital transformation, which is one of our themes, right? Is for me, what I found as a success criteria was when I found the context of the people on the shop floor, whether it's maintenance, whether it's the quality team, and taking that strategic initiative often that comes with rolling out these digital transformations. So just going back to the basics in terms of finding who the stakeholders are, reminding them what's in it for them, enabled for some of that scale for success. So in terms of digital transformation, Jane and Catalina, how did that factor into your manufacturing backgrounds over the time as well?
So, I spent a couple of decades really working in Industry 3 space or computer control. And when I accepted the senior vice president role at Covestro in Germany over global process control technology, the board gave me the direction to implement Industry 4.0. And at the time, we all just pretended we knew exactly what that meant, or at least I did anyway. What I came quickly to learn was that the old methods of computer control only took you so far. There were so many opportunities for significant improvement if we could just access and contextualize all the potential data. And today I want to help manufacturers learn how to adopt technology so the employees' work improves. And my colleague at Stanley used to say they want to make work suck less. So I think that's very important. And there's also been proven impact that increased adoption of technology ultimately improves energy uses and supports other important KPIs, such as the company's bottom line.
I really relate on what you're saying, Jane, because part of what really brought me through my steps with the manufacturing was seeing how what I was helping with was making the job from people easier and better. So what your colleague was saying, make work suck less, is what a lot of people feel like. As for me, I was an engineering plant in a hardwood flooring plant, and my main focus was really to reduce the bottlenecks. And where do I start doing that? And really was by talking to people, and I started really relying what the operators had, and I was just standing with them, seeing how they were doing their jobs, and looking at all the amount of things that they had to do while still operating the machines. I talked to the supervisors on how much time they were actually spending on gathering data and passing information across the whole plant, and how the managers were looking at that data and all the work that they were doing. So then it clicked, and I realized that so many people were doing so much of manual work and redundant processes, then that's where I start focusing. If we could make that easier for them and really make sure that they could see all these in a more real time. By utilizing technology, that's where I focus really. And I remember after a few months of work, we managed to improve their times and not see just the data 24 hours after the shift finished, but at the same time that they were operating, it was a a big aha for me. And a few years later, I actually found that Raven was building a product and solved a lot of these issues that I experienced, and I saw people dealing with those issues. And this is here I am today, and I'm enjoying it right now.
No, thanks, Ken, both for sharing. So I do want to engage the audience a little bit. I know it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so we're going to run a quick poll just to get some engagement. So I want to find out, does your organization have a digital transformation strategy in place? And we're looking for a single choice. And the choices are, no, we haven't discussed a digital transformation strategy yet. Yes, we have a digital transformation strategy in place, or we've identified the need for a strategy to adopt new technologies, or we're unsure. And Jane and Catalina, early in your careers, was digital transformation something that was starting to come into place yet, or was still kind of, or you had to build that from scratch in some of the organizations you've been at?
For me, it was a lot of.
Go ahead.
For me, it was a lot of there was nothing, and really the concept of Industry 4.0 wasn't there. So it was really in this early stages, and then it was just building a base towards that.
And so for me, it's the same, right? And one thing I've learned along the way is that every site and every unit, every shift has different culture, and there's lots to learn from the pain points of people. So,
and I think our results are in. I'll just read that out. So 38% of our audience have a digital transformation strategy in place. 62% have identified the need for a strategy to adopt new technologies. And then we had kind of like 0% on, no, we haven't discussed one and we're unsure. So I think our majority of our audience, if they've identified the need for it, and probably in the adoption and choice phases for now. So I think collectively all our experiences, just based on that first theme, I think we all agree on that bottoms up approach. So for me, the formula is simple. It's focus on the people, focus on the process, and choose the right tool for to make everyone's jobs easier. And I think that's what I love about Raven's technology. It focuses on that operator engagement, where we're asking the simple question to the operator: why are you down? Are we waiting for materials? And with a simple tap, we're engaging them to give us that human context. So in terms of getting started with digital transformation, throughout my career, I've experienced a lot of improvement methodologies like Lean Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, BPM, the whole works. I've kind of experienced a lot of those. So in terms of their methodologies that I've gone, one of the things that was very interesting for me, and I think Jane, you highlighted this earlier, where it's every plant that I worked in had a different starting point, different teams had different approaches. So Jane, what's your take on gaining wins on the show floor in some of those scenarios?
So I think you really have to keep that in mind, right? The different culture and the different people. And one of the things that's really useful, and we have a slide on this, is you have to first understand your gaps in the process and workflows. And so the digital plant maturity model, the DPMM, which is an excellent way to try and organize and to gain understanding of what should be your focus point for each factory. And the model was created by a collaboration group in biopharmaceutical manufacturing, and it defines 5 levels. So pre-digital, digital slices, connected plant, predictive plant, and adaptive plant. And levels 1 and 2 are more about individual plants, and then that's where you really focus on the culture. And level 5 is looking at the entire value stream, so how you can improve your supply chain. And at the bottom of that screen, you should have a link if you wanted to actually go into further depth on that. It's a free download from the collaboration. And so first thing you have to do is collect the data, and this is everything. I've spent 30 years collecting data and trying to make sense of it. What are you seeing, Catalina?
Well, I think you're right. It really depends where the company is at, and for me, definitely collecting data was key in my experience, because that allow us to drive those improvements within the plan. And without the data, it was very difficult to navigate the challenge when we didn't have that clear vision of them, right? So if we were trying to solution, it was more about feeling that could be the problem, but in reality, there were underlying problems that we were not seeing. And without data, we were just spending a lot of resources and energy fixing the wrong issue. And not to mention all the frustrations that causes on all levels, from operators to managers, and it really makes a difference.
No, that's very insightful. And I think just seeing this slide here, Jane, it really speaks volumes to that, because I think the approach is different, right? Are you doing 1 or 3 plans, or are you doing up to those enterprise type plans where you have to really make sure that the culture is ready? So I think we're going to jump into another poll here, and Mauricia will set that up for us. So poll number 2, we want to understand just around from our audience around shop floor data. So how does your team collect shop floor data now? And we have 5 choices. Is it manual data entry, which is whiteboards, pen and paper, time and motion studies, which is observing and recording movements on the shop floor? Or do you have a production monitoring system, such as a specialized software, MES, ERP, a combination of the above, or we do not collect shop floor data at all? Jane and Catalina, any thoughts on where you think our audience is based? 63% are looking or have a strategy in place or looking to implement something.
You know, in discrete, they seem to be further behind on collecting data across the industry, because, you know, most of manufacturing, at least in the US, are really small facilities. And so I bet that, you know, industry-wide, there's probably a lot. Most is going to be in that top category where it's the manual processes. And that's great. And it's a way to move forward. But there's a lot that's missed when you're having to transcribe things and move it along manually.
What I think that some of the manufacturers had started implementing small pieces where they can. And even though they still have a lot of data, manual data entry in their plans, there might be a bit of combination between those 2 ways to do it.
No, absolutely. I think I laugh at the time and motion studies all the time, because it's something I did earlier in my career, and you tend to make decisions on that short time snap, right? So the results are in. So 13% are actually using manual data entry, 6% are doing time and motion studies, 13% production monitoring systems in place, and 75% are doing a combination of all those 3. So very interesting. We have a bit, and I think Catalina, you nailed it, right? You said, I think it's about identifying how you can use all the different pieces based on what's in your plant.
I did notice that when you do a time on tool study, time and motion study, that people change their behavior during the study. So the results aren't necessarily conclusive. Now, if you're using camera-based and where people get used to it, that might change that.
No, that's absolutely it. And then it's difficult to track even kind of like your success criteria after the fact, because once you, for example, for me, I was doing capital projects, you bring in the equipment and the ROI that we had on paper, not going to happen. So both of you have highlighted, we're going to move on to our 3rd theme here. So both of you have highlighted that the operator is so important to yield results. I've seen that again as I was talking around my capital project execution earlier in my career. I recently had a customer that asked me how to engage the operator. So I will call that operator Pete for this example. He's operated his machine the same way for the past 21 years. And now they have pressures to boost productivity. I think we all went through COVID, different macro conditions that are happening right now around the supply chain. So what have you seen or done in the past that's been successful in creating engagement within the workforce? And in my example was someone like Pete, who's just done the same thing for the last 21 years. And then how do you scale that for even multi-plans? Kat, I'll start with you.
Brenda, when I was in the plan, what it really worked for me was listen to Pete and to all Pete's in the plant, because as I was saying earlier, they are the ones who are there, and they are the ones who are seeing the machine and experiencing the problems, and they really want to get the results, but most of the time they haven't had the opportunity to be part of the solution. Most of the time they are given a solution and they are not necessarily very engaged. And creating that engagement and giving them a voice, it makes a whole lot of difference on the results. Getting those small wins for them where they can see the value of the changes, they will actually help you to push forward the project a lot. Building a continuous improvement culture, it can be a very long process and a very hard one, but it's going to be very, very rewarding.
Yes, and I completely agree with that. It's a great way to really get engagement. You must listen to Pete. I can't stress that enough. He's got valuable hands-on experience about the nuances of how to run their equipment. And it's just, you've got to really get in there and listen to him. So I recently, earlier this year, saw an excellent example of workforce engagement and listening to Pete. So I had the pleasure of doing a site visit at Plexus Corp, Neenah operations in Neenah, Wisconsin, and they have a continuous improvement program that deeply involves operations. So if the operator makes a suggestion, it gets evaluated for viability and then gets implemented across the country if it makes sense. And what's more is it's visible to everyone on the shop floor, and it's become a competition for the best improvement idea. And there's even regional and global competitions, and all in the spirit of listening to Pete. I've seen things in the past where there's some sort of idea suggestion program, and usually it just kind of fizzles out. But the way they were making it really visible and engaging operations was inspirational.
That's actually interesting to hear as well, Jane, because I think, at least for me, early in my career, there's always the pressure that comes with deploying some of these aspects, right? So yeah. That shop floor engagement or shop floor buy-in is something that we tend to oversee quite a bit, but I think you guys nailed it. You have to take that moment to do that engagement level to guarantee almost your success with it and sustain the change that's being contributed to as well.
Yes, and just keep in mind, if the operator is part of the improvement, they're going to become part owner, and they're going to also help everyone else become part owner. And then that's how you get the sustainability in your solutions.
No, that's great advice, Jane. I think we're going to move on to our fourth theme here, because I do want to make sure we have enough time to go through some of the pre-submitted questions that came in and what will come in the Q&A box as well. So again, earlier, I think COVID shutdown was very eye-opening for me. I was working in the CPG industry, and having to evolve to remote work while keeping the plants running was an adventure. It included implementing technologies, and I think there's a lot of people who had to do that in a very short time span just to keep their businesses going. And communication became challenging. We had to implement new tools. So what are some of the ways you would recommend to leverage different teams to respond to change and adopt digital technology?
So for me, I mean, when we had, I was living in Germany at the time when the pandemic started, and I was surprised how quickly IT changed and started implementing improvements so that we could actually all do remote meetings and things like that. And but for me, actually, sitting with the operator and doing that engagement is going to help with that adoption of the digital technologies. You make them part owner and incorporate their ideas into the solutions, and that's what really makes it drive home.
I can remember when I was implementing these projects in the very beginning of the transition. I think two things that were very important is engaged really early with the other things that are going to be part of that. So you mentioned IT, and this is something that it just clicked in my mind, because that was a big thing for us, and it's really how we get IT on board. And because if they are not managing the project, they want to make sure that security and all their policies are still there, so they have to be involved. But also from the operator perspective, I think the transition is important for them, because some operators will really getting bored and really move on with the new solutions, but some others require more. I need a proof that this is actually going to work and make my work easy, and it's not just something else that you are making me do. And for me, and work with the operators and give them that transition, they could, you know, switch back and forth. It was a win point for me.
Another thing to consider is you have to have the right message for the different leaders or the different levels in the organization, because everyone wants to know what's in it for me. So that top line, they want to know return on investment. Why should I spend my time and effort and money in this thing? So there's a way to approach that, to make sure that you actually get the funding and the support that you need in order to make improvements. And everybody needs a little something different. So you have to understand who your stakeholders are and make sure that you tailor the message so you're giving them the information they need while making progress.
And that's a good point, Jane. I was actually going to ask what if you've experienced that, because that was one of my biggest challenges that I had to go through, because all of a sudden, like, a lot of the technologies were now owned by IT, who were not very close to what we were doing in supply chain. So bridging that gap again, if you kind of compartmentalize it and pick each department, so we can pick one tool, but are we getting adequate information? Or to your point earlier, right? Is it a best of the breed solution where we can piecemeal a lot of the technologies together to deliver the right value?
Yeah, so, you know, when I was at Covestro in the SVP role, I mean, I had a budget and a team, so it was different. But at Stanley, we had to figure out how do we work most efficiently with IT, and we actually had a really good IT/OT relationship there. But there was a lot to do to try and, you know, actually make that progress, and to get everything connected across the organization, and to do that.
No, that's fantastic. And then in terms of that I want to kind of ask one last question just around the rollout of, like, the different teams that you need to engage when you're working across multiple plants, especially, right? I think it's like geographical differences, for example, and then different priorities within the same site. So it's very rare that we get to see each plant that's making the exact same things, that have the exact same process. What advice would you give to some of our audience members who may be in those scenarios as well, on how we bridge some of those gaps?
So for me, I mean, at first I always look at infrastructure, and do we have the right infrastructure? Because when you follow the Purdue model and you have that DMZ between IT and OT, and everything else that you do builds on top of that. So you start with that there. And that's really where IT and OT start collaborating and working together. And that definitely includes security and privacy and things like that. And then there needs to be flexibility at each site for exactly what you're doing, because you're making different things and you're incorporating different technologies. So you might have a CNC at one location where that's all you're doing is precision equipment. You might have injection molding at another. So your needs are going to be different. You can't pick one tool and say everyone's getting this and you're all going to be happy. It just doesn't work that way. It's got to make sense for your products and for your people.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
I think definitely involving all the parties from early stages of the projects facilitates a lot a smoother project, right? Because sometimes we concentrate so much the effort on the technical perspective, on what the problem is, on how we're trying to solve it, and then we forget who has to be involved in it, and they might have something to say, and even sometimes it's not just to block your solution, it's also to make it better, because they might have ideas and they have knowledge than you might not, and it will give you more more options on how to get there. And oftentimes, doesn't matter what kind of the project is or what kind of industry you are, bringing more people to the table makes a better solutions.
That's great
Absolutely.
advice. Yeah, fantastic. So I'm doing a little bit of timekeeping. We do have a lot of questions that are coming in.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I
Great.
think in terms, we'll shift over to the Q&A, and I will start off with their pre-submitted questions. And I see there's also some live questions that have come in. So I'll do a little bit of both. So I'm going to start off with the easiest one. What was your biggest challenge in your career and how did you deal with it? Catalina, you want to start? Jane?
I mean, there's a couple of, I think the biggest challenges really had to do with culture. So, and it's sorry, I'm lost for a second. So there were a couple incidences where, my degree is actually in mathematics, and I was working with a bunch of chemical engineers, and there were a few times where it came up, well, Jane, you're not a chemical engineer, how can you understand that? But I'm a statistician, I'm a mathematician, I'm looking at cause and effect relationships in the data. So that's how I learned how the processes run. And so for me, it was more of a personal and how do we reach everyone? But throughout these hardships and being one of very few women on site and working, being 20 years old and working with operations, I learned how to negotiate. What is it that the people need to hear? What do they need from me? And how do I give them that so I can move forward in my job and what I'm doing? So for me, it was more personal. I mean, there's always the bureaucracy in large companies and getting money and making progress on projects and having budget cuts and all that. And that's just a part of working in a company.
I can rely so much on what you're saying, Jen, because I think for me, when I see this question, it really brings up more that personal side, and it's more those technical issues. They were always there, and they are just speed bumps, and you have to slow down, think how to solve it, make a structural thinking there, and you get solutions. But it's that personal side, how you actually deal with that cultural and to make the change, to implement it. So that change management for me was a big thing there. I rely a lot on being a 20-something years old girl sitting in a 20 people room where I was the only girl there. It was a challenge, was more how I'm gonna make them hear or believe what I'm saying, how I'm gonna solve them the projects, right? So I think that's probably what comes to my mind when I see that question.
No, thank you both for sharing. I think from my perspective, it's been the element of learning how to really listen. And I think over the years, I'm proud to say that I'm overcoming that a lot. And like to your point, Catalina, I think you highlighted, right? The more stakeholders you listen to and just keep that awareness, you get a lot of feedback and inputs that can enhance the success of any project you're working on. So I did also want to mention to our audience as well that in the background, as we go through our Q&A, we're going to have a poll running in the background. If anyone's interested in a one-to-one demo of Raven, please click yes or no. And behind the scenes, Marisha will take down your info and reach out for any details. So I'll move on to the next question. And this one says, how do you approach resistance to using these tools and strategies? Change is difficult. How do you ease the conflict caused by the transformation? How do you balance the deployment of these initiatives with other competing priorities?
So I think this goes back to some of the things I've already mentioned, that as an individual contributor, and I would be trying to make change, I'm working with all these operators in the plants, and I want to write code to change the way the control works in the process unit. And so I made sure that every single time I wanted to do anything, I sat with the operator, I explained what I was seeing, I would get their feedback, and I would incorporate that feedback, and we would work together on doing the download and checking it out. And the operator's always in control, so if it's not working, you can turn it off, that's fine, just let me know so I can fix it. But when you look at like a global approach and how do you do it from a team, it's a similar sort of thing. So at Covestro, we had site digital champions at each location, where they were the ones who were someone who's native to the plant and engaging with operations, and someone that the operators knew and trusted. And then saying, okay, here we have this new solution, and let's work it with you. And that's, we started in Caojing, which is in Shanghai, China, and kind of built a blueprint on how did that work, making sure that we were, somewhat flexible with the solution, but then took that same engagement model and rolled it out to other plants as we were rolling out the solution.
Okay, I will go to the next question on the live Q&A. Says, can you share how do you determine what technology and what equipment you want to implement the digital transformation? Also, how do you determine when to scale it out?
Can I start this one, and I will hear what you guys have to say, but I think it comes back to the pen where it really depends where you are at and where you have available to do it, because there are plans that have a lot of newer technologies that will allow you to do more with less or faster because you already have things in place. So I think it comes back to really checking that the status where you are at and really looking at what you're capable to do. And you know, it would be great if you can get to that end point of the project or where you actually want to be at the end of the line in one step, but usually it takes many steps, and usually by taking one piece at the time, it's probably the best advice, and I can take one piece at the time and see where you can digitalize things, and the needs will depend on where you want to be as a company. So it's unfortunately not a one fits all solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm still waiting for magic, but I completely agree with you, Catalina. And when you want to do something and roll it out, you start with an MVP. So you figure out where is your pain point, and how easy is it to actually solve that with a digital tool. So pick something that you can actually solve, and then prove it with a most viable solution there, and then you can take it and scale it in the production facilities. So if you happen to have standardized equipment around the world in your different factories, then it makes a big difference. Without it though, but with the infrastructure in place, you can still have a scaling factor there. But you prove it with your MVP, and then you scale from that position.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it also ties in, there's another similar question, which is what is the quickest and most effective way to get started with digital transformation if you work in a factory with older equipment, not currently internet friendly, and have an older facility set up? So I think you guys touched on some of these pain points, because I think it goes back, right? Like when I look at the Raven technology, one of the examples, Catalina, I think on one of our deployments that we've done is all we need is a 24-volt signal. We've gotten a signal from a stack light that was showing us whether we were producing or not. And that particular customer had an ROI of they increased their uptime by over 30% within a 5-month period. So I think it goes back to, don't over want to deliver, just understand what is it that I can do. And I think it's pretty amazing when we're able to get the operator to give us context of why they were down and just actioning those in real time. So it's pick the area that you can drive the results, focus in getting the value. I think Raven, we actually recommend that limited implementation, start with a few assets, get that steady state, get everybody really excited, and then roll it out slowly to the other areas as well while you're focusing on value delivery.
And I think that there is always the possibility to do those MVPs and that minimal step to see some improvement. And there are really easy technologies that you can use. And I'm really talking sometimes it's just a sensor that can be connected to a system that requires simple signals, like what you, Brenda, you're saying. That project is exactly that. And this usually works great with PLC or machines, and they don't even have network cards and they cannot be connected to internet. So you have no possibility to actually extract data. Or there is a lot of challenges technology-wise because the plants have no internet. And so there are a few things there, but there are easy ways to get started and just to prove that minimal concept.
Hey, we have lots of questions coming in. I'm glad the audience is very engaged. Okay, another one. People sometimes think about ROI of IoT before implementing. How can you shift that mindset when it comes to digital transformation? Jane, any thoughts on this one? I think it's a challenge too, right? Because you need that business case to get the money first. But
IoT is so cheap these days. I mean, you can start with just something from Walmart, right? And something cheap, and just prove, hey, if we had this data point, what difference, the great difference it would make. But really, edge computing and IoT devices, even if you buy industrial grade sensors, is not that expensive. It's so much cheaper doing IoT than it is hardwiring absolutely everything in the factory. And that's really the benefit. You have immediate visibility to what's happening in that space. And you can start taking action. And when you have that visibility and can take action, then your whole throughput improves a little bit. And that's really how it's done. And again, you start with an MVP, improve how much time was saved, and you turn that time into money, and that's how you sell it.
And I think I'm going to read this comment selfishly, and I swear we did not precede it, but there's a comment from Catherine that says, people on the floor live with sight, sounds, nuances of the factory. They know their machines and can make connections and have insights that only someone who works in that space can do. It is a lost opportunity to not include these experts in discussions. The bottoms-up approach mentioned by Jane takes advantage of this knowledge. Raven takes this to a whole other level by helping to empower their works. Win, win, win. So I thought I had to read
Wow.
that. It's a very nice message.
Shout out to Catherine there for plugging the solution. That's nice.
Okay, another question, maybe Catalina or Jane, if you want to take this one. Can you share your timeline spent to identify some valuable ROI from the digital transformation? Any chance of relating roadblocks against compensation package to shop floor employees?
Compensation package to shop floor employees. I don't think I understand that. And
and maybe we'll answer the first one because I think it's a two-part question. Can you share your timeline spent to identify some valuable ROI? So I think maybe from implementation, what's the fastest ROI delivery that you've seen?
Oh, okay. And thank you for translating it for me. So actually, if you've got an engaged workforce and expert team doing the installation, I've often see that your ROI takes care of itself in 6 to 12 months, and frequently. So you're saving money and before you really even start to scale. I've seen this numerous times in the past, and it's hard for those who don't believe in digital transformation or think that it's not actually providing value, for them to realize that. But when you start putting the numbers behind it, then they're like, oh, okay, well, I can see that now. So making it all visible and doing that. But really the ROI has always been within months. And that's within months of everything actually working and you starting, not from when you get the capital project approved and you start doing the installation and things like that, because that's gonna, the actual installation will vary in time depending on how much you have to wire up and what all you have to do.
And I think I agree for that I think it's in a few months we start seeing some visible things. And I think it really started to accumulate from day one. I do remember this project that was at the end of the line. There was a lot of quality going in that workplace. The operators will check a lot of quality here and they will make a lot of mistakes because they had to enter things manually all the time. And by automating certain part of that process and automating the data that was coming out, already reduces a lot of loss on inventory. A lot of issues then was mismarked as a different grade, so they were selling as a different quality, or be even dismissed as product because they thought they were rejects. And just the fact that you are enable people to have to spend some more time on the actual work, they were capable to have more attention to what they were actually doing as job and not on those manual processes on the side. And all these implementations with the operator allow, I'm talking directors and managers of the plan to really have the data live, and they were actually taking decisions as they were going through the chief and not thinking and reflecting what happened yesterday with the production. So I think that was it was a win-win for the floor shop and the management side.
No, absolutely. And I think focus on the small wins, right? I think just my experience working here at Raven, within 60 days of having that real-time visibility, these miraculous wins that happen just by having their visibility of the data on the shop floor, where it's like they haven't even actioned anything, but that behavior change just happens automatically with the teams as well.
Well, that's exactly what happens. It's really amazing to watch and be part of that.
Another question that's come in, we have multiple tools that collect data for shop floor activity, both machine and operator driven. We're currently struggling with costing runtime for machines that run operator free. Any suggestions on how to capture these runtime costs of machines? Cycle time, perhaps?
I mean, yeah, looking at the whole tech time, I think makes sense. And actually, you need to look at your production floor and think about what does it cost me per minute on each machine, and you look at the value of the products coming through it, how long does it take to make, and you can actually develop a formula on exactly what that means and how much does it cost per minute, and use that to gauge what that runtime cost is.
No, that makes sense. Anything else to add there, Kat? I think you nailed it from that perspective, Jane.
I think that's what it is. I don't really think I can add too much because that's exactly what you want to see. What is the cost? What is causing you that high end cost from the runtime, right? So.
And if we answer the wrong question, please put another question in.
Okay, and then at the very start, after explaining to the employee the transformation, have you asked them if they are interested to be part of the change management, and what have you done if they've told you that they are not interested? So I like this question. It kind of goes, there's a meme that I always steal that in all my slides off whenever we say, who wants to change? Everyone's hands goes up. And then when we have to do the change, then the hands start to come down type of thing. So it does feel a little bit about that scenario. And then I think from my perspective, and open to you, Kat and Jane, if you have any additional comments, I think even internally here at Raven, we have a saying that says, repeat it 7 times until you get that so what for that person, and ask them the right questions on what's important for them as well at times.
So from my perspective, I mean, being part of change management, if you're engaging the workforce, then they are part of it. And so actually including them and listening to them and answering their questions and maybe incorporating feedback into your solution makes them part of it, without actually saying change management, which everyone, kind of has a negative response to that phrase. That's my thought. What about you, Catalina?
I think what it comes down to what we were saying earlier, and part of the change management is what is that awareness around on what we're doing this. And you, most of the time, if you're engaging people and you're listening to their problems, that awareness is there. It's already created, and they're being part of the solution as they go. So to me, and it might sound like a little bit of repetition, but it's really to make sure that you listen to people, but you have to close the loop. If you ask the questions and you listen, you have to close the loop and go back to them and really give that feedback or incorporate in your process or make changes as the feedbacks come in. If you don't close that loop, they are going to lose the engagement, and they are going to feel like they are just being asked because it's a checkbox to check, but they are not being part of the actual implementation.
And the question specifically says, Jane, you mentioned being flexible and listening to feedback with company-wide deployments. How can you be flexible with such large deployments? And how do you create that feedback loop when you're working with so many different people in areas?
It's really complex, and there was definitely some pushback from my teams and it's like, okay, you have to go talk to people and actually really engage. And what I mean about being flexible, so like the underlying solution might be the same, so the back end is all the same, doing the calculations, machine learning, AI, whatever it is that you have, but the way it's presented on the screen in the user interface might really make a difference. So one operator might say, you know what, that's noise. I don't want to see that. Here's what makes my job easier. Can I see that? And so most of the flexibility that we incorporated in our solution at Covestro really had to do with that user interface and what is on that screen that helps them with that. And the feedback loop, when you have, so we had a team of these digital champions, and people from each site that were involved with our group, not part of our group, part of the site that we engaged with. And it was the same as Stanley. We had digital champions at the different facilities. And those people would work with the shop floor folks and were known, and it made a difference. And so that constant engagement makes it's so much easier to actually incorporate and do that. And even though it sounds daunting, it is possible. Yes, open communication and continuous reinforcement really makes a difference.
You know what, this actually makes me think of when we are talking at Raven about how we are going to implement new features or how we incorporate the feedback from our customers. And it made me really think on how we keep a standard product, but being customizable enough for them and being flexible enough for the customers. And I think it's not an easy goal solution every time, but there are possibilities to actually make it. What are the key points for each party or for each participant, right? And I think that's what usually we go with, what is more important with our customers and how we display this and how we actually configure this in a way that we can be flexible enough for all of them.
No, absolutely. And sometimes it's for me, it's also really, really important to understand what the success criteria is and what you're trying to deliver. Because often whenever you do some of these big implementations, you get lost in what are we really trying to deliver and what is it of value creation. So again, I think it just goes back to, that constant communication as you're deploying, do those reflection points to kind of step back on, are we looking at our data, are we actioning? And with the Raven system, right, it's really about that real-time visibility. We want people to be looking and engage your operators so they can see something on the UX, which is in front of them on their tablet. Let them have the control to action and do something different to minimize that. And I think I'm also time gatekeeping here before Marisha behind the scenes kind of reminds me. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So Catalina, this one, how well does Raven interact with Oracle-based ERP software such as JDE Edwards?
For this kind of implementations, we had currently conversations on more than one of this kind. Basically, we are trying to, going back to the previous question, going to that standard on how we actually can work with different platforms and how we are actually building towards working with more of one. And just as a hint and a little spoiler, we are actually working towards API right now that can communicate with these other systems externals and can actually allow us to get there. And it can easily interact. Currently, we can interact in a more customized way, but we are working to standardize that.
I would actually recommend for a demo offer if they would like to just get a little bit more details about our ERP integrations as well. And another question that comes in, still on the theme of their scaling aspect of it. Do you incorporate a management of change MOC process to identify any risk that it could bring to the process?
So I'll start with that because it's one of my passions. And so this to me is like a safety question. You absolutely have to follow the management of change process. You go through all the engineering drawings, all the updates, discuss what you want to change, look at any sort of safety, environmental, or other kind of risks that could happen, downtime risks, things like that. And you do it for every single location. So each facility will have a different sign-off form, and so you have to repeat it because there could be something that you didn't consider. Like one facility might have a light curtain for walking into a certain area, and another facility doesn't. So you would consider, what makes sense for this one. So you absolutely have to do risk management and identify those risks with the MOC, and you include experts as well as operation experts, meaning the operators, in that discussion, because don't just do it the engineers alone.
No, spot on, Jane. And I think from my perspective as well, working with multiple customers, this is something that's often missed at times. And I think it's the assumption that, whatever we deployed in one will cascade to even within the plant, different areas. And there's always so many nuances where that reflection point of getting everybody involved, so we really identify what success means, is important.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we've gone through across. Oh, no, I'm going to add one more as we look. So in terms of, we have faced numerous market disruptions over the past few years. How have the disruptions affected you? How have they opened a market opportunity? I think I could start with that one, at least from our Raven perspective. I think the real-time visibility we saw during COVID was a game changer. I think internally for myself, I selfishly used to say that if I was back in the plant, that is something that I absolutely needed because it just gives everybody access to the information. I think even early in my career, it was data collection goes into a black hole. So with the Raven system, that ability that you can use the web browser, you can be on the shop floor and see exactly what's happening, I think has been a game changer. And in terms of market opportunity, I think digitization is a big thing. And Jane, you kind of nailed it, right? It comes to the cost. One of the benefits that I like about Raven is you don't have to have their factory of the future type of technology, right? We really work with you to implement what's best for you. And then to Carolina's point, work with the best of the breeds as well. So to close it off, I think Kat and Jane, I'll give you an opportunity to answer that question from your perspectives as well.
So from my perspective, I've had the chance to talk to numerous startup companies, and this is something that comes up. Well, how has the pandemic affected you? And surprisingly, some of the feedback that I've gotten is that it's actually made it better for them because people realize that you have to have connectivity, you have to have remote access, you have to have digital tools in order to be able to work if you can't actually travel and be there in person and things like that. So I've had several different startups tell me that it's actually benefited them because the customers realize, hey, I have a problem. And digital is the only way to solve it. And the pandemic kind of did a shift in people's thinking about digital and how it's applied.
And I think that kind of things actually make us realize things that we didn't really realize were happening just because they were more organically made or done. And with these disruptions, you have to think of them and how you actually still go through those pieces. So communication wise, how you actually still working with your team, how you're still meeting your goals, and digital transformation can be a really good way to go through those ones. And it's not the only thing, it's really attaching to that management of change and solutions to get there. I think that it's a win solution.
No, fantastic. So it's 2:59. I did want to thank both of you for joining me today. I hope this won't be the last that we get to do this again. And I think the conversation, even for me, has been super informative. And thank you to the audience for the engagement. I think for me, this is one of the webinars where we got the most engagement in terms of questions. So huge thank you. And again, Marisha will be sending out a recording. And Jane, thank you so much for making the time to spend the afternoon with us here.
Certainly, I've really enjoyed it. It's been nice getting to know you all. And yeah, it's fun. Happy to come back sometime.
No, fantastic. And thank you, Catalina and Marisha in the background. Thank you. And I wish everybody a fantastic afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.